Hi, my name is Josiah, and I am documenting the journey to a 100K month. So, if you were not here before, this is the goal for this month here. Oh, this is the goal for this month here. This is what I need to do daily. This is actually increased because I have a very shit start to the month for the last 4 days. Um, Realistically, have not closed anything. So, we're in a troublesome little place where last month we did, pretty fucking amazing. This month, really, really dog shit. So, the main things I'm working on now is just getting up to 15K in revenue a day. Problem is lead flow has been super, super low. And I've had to DQ pretty much any prospect I've talked to. Yesterday, I didn't even work. A lot of shit going on. So to update, obviously, this is the goal. Everything stays the same in terms of what I actually need to do. I just really couldn't do, 7 calls in this past time. But basically, today we took 4 calls. Today is day 4. I'm a fucking idiot. Today is day 4. Took 3 calls today. 0 pretty much on everything across the board. But we came up with a few lessons. Okay. So I've come to realize my process does not work on purely preventative prospects. It does not whatsoever. And I don't think any sales process really does. But maybe it does. So someone who is 100% preventative, it just doesn't work because the pain is already 40 years out. So for me, I've just realized like it just equals me not getting a close or than being qualified to even hear the pitch in the first place. Now, that was kind of a win of mine. And it was a win of mine because it brought me clarity, because it's like, what can you do for someone like that to really increase urgency and bring their urgency threshold up? You really can't do too much of anything because it feels like you're really fighting and pulling and really trying to sell someone. And I just can't sell that way. So that doesn't work for me. But when it comes to it, the fully preventative prospect cannot be sold, at least with my process. Maybe another one, if you want to do that, that's fine. I just don't find a way to increase the urgency threshold while they're purely preventative. If you can bring them to a place where they're not purely preventative, that's fine. And you're not bringing them there, you're just unveiling it. So it's like if someone says, oh, I'm worried about this happening in the future, like their body's in perfect shape, blah, blah, blah. And then they only want to do something about their body because they're like, I just don't want to be fat 40 years down the road because I see someone else being fat. If it has emotional significance, then they aren't purely preventative. If it's like a thing where I want to be able to show up for my kids, constantly, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, and do you see yourself kind of weaning out of that or in any way now, or you just try and bring that identity that they don't want in the future into the present and see if any aspects of that are starting to show currently? Then at that point, they're not purely preventative anymore. They're actively trying to reduce the symptoms they're already experiencing from a negative future that they could have down the road. So anybody who's purely preventative and they just say, hey, I just really don't want to be fat, or I just really don't want to gain weight, or I just don't want to be in a place where, it could be anything, but anything purely preventative. My process does not work. Or commodities. You cannot sell a commodity because you need urgency. And when I say you need urgency, I've just realized that in this formula, so we'll just do this. We'll just call this cost. Sorry, I spelled that wrong. We'll call this loss. Okay. Cost and loss times solve alone. So with these here, if you don't have these, it's very hard to create urgency. You can logically make something make sense in someone's brain, but if it's not costing them anything day by day, and they don't have anything to lose in the future, if they don't do something about this, why would they do something about it? It's not causing them any pain now. It's not going to cause them any pain in the future. Or the future is 40 years from now, and humans, like something 40 years from now, you're not going to take it serious. So at the end of the day, you can make it logically like make sense. They say, no, I definitely can't solve this alone. Definitely need help to solve it. But if these aspects aren't, holy shit, if these aspects here aren't airtight, they don't really have a reason to act. And that's why my process doesn't work with it, because logically that doesn't make sense in my brain. If there is no current cost, like whatsoever, in terms of emotions, lifestyle, identity, or in terms of the daily physical, like pain, or costs, then they're not going to have any reason to act now. And then past that, if there's nothing coming up soon where they're like, next 6, 12 months or 5 or 10 years, and that can hold emotional significance in terms of pain or anything like that, and you can somehow bring that to the future and uncover that for them, then still at the end of the day, they don't really have a reason to act. So you need both of these factors to be truly present for a sale to really be active and for a person to move past a certain action threshold. Okay. Now, this last piece is just the piece that I think is like logically really important, but We won't get into that. They need to have belief that they can't solve it on their own. If they believe 100% they can solve it on their own, they could have a ton of urgency, but they still won't act. So if they believe they can solve it on their own, or they can solve it on their own in the time frame they want, useless pretty much. Okay. But that was the biggest lesson that I learned over this past little bit of time. So biggest mistake, and the thing that I learned, is trying to close a purely preventative prospect. Every prospect where I'm like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna just do it, has not closed, bro. Has not closed. And my offer rate is like 70 or 80%, right? And my close rate on those offers is pretty high. Okay. But the problem is for these people, these are people who obviously, one, they have a current cost and they have some form of loss in the future, and they believe they cannot solve it alone. Anybody who aligns with that pretty much is closed by me, unless they can't, they don't have the money, because I can gain depth on those. But my problem is anyone who is purely preventative, I just fucking suck at closing. Like there's the thing is if someone just has loss in the future and there's no current cost now, it's hard to just leverage current like future costs. They're not going to take it seriously. So, or at least they never do, in my opinion. They're kind of like nonchalant about it. So essentially, the biggest mistake is wasting my time with someone like that who is purely preventative. If I get 15 minutes in with you, generally I can tell in like the first 5 or 10 minutes. But if I get 15 minutes in and it still doesn't feel like you actually care about this, and I'm asking questions that push you to depth, I'm just going to push you towards a random solution, and then just check it. Not a random solution, a solution that's going to help you based on what you've told me. And then just check in with you like 2 weeks later. Just set up a check in, follow up with them, see how it's going until you run into a constraint or a problem. That's what I'm going to do. I don't care, because realistically, I'll still close and I'll still make money on majority of the prospects. It's just the purely preventatives. It just does not work for me. So what is working? Okay. Extreme qualification is working. If someone is not meeting my qualification criteria, I check them. I challenge them on that. So being willing to challenge people whenever they're not meeting the criteria in your brain, or logically something isn't connecting, don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid to break away from the script. And that's really kind of what I'm focusing on for myself. I don't use a script, but it's just ruthless qualification to where you're dialed in pretty much every single step of the way to make sure that you're golden. Okay. Now, the next piece, the pitch, that's the same as the last video. If you haven't seen that, go check that out. That's where I literally talk about everything, but it's just a completely tailored pitch to exactly what they told you in discovery, and solves exactly what they told you in discovery. That's pretty much it. Now, objections, that's staying deep in the pocket. It's not giving up. First of all, if this person can afford it, you have complete authority to objection handle them for hours on end, until they eventually close. Because if they've earned the pitch, realistically, your objection channel, you should be so bought into it, because they're extremely qualified for your solution. You know what this is costing them, and you know what they're going to lose in the future if they don't solve this. So you should fight for this person as hard as possible to make sure they get the help that they need. That's the whole purpose of discovery, because once they're qualified, you now have permission to actually fight for them. If they're not qualified and they don't meet the qualifications, it's kind of hard to fight for somebody like that in objection handling. So you want to qualify in discovery. Course, my shit doesn't work for preventatives, but if you're not selling to purely preventative prospects, then at that point, I would say this framework here is the best way to qualify someone whatsoever. And if you want access to like all the qualification stuff and like the way that I think, there's a free thing down in the description. Okay. But basically, that's what's working. Staying deep in the pocket. If they're qualified, stay with them the entire time. Ask them the hard questions to get them to actually commit, and then follow, isolate, reframe, why, action. And that's what I'm doing pretty much every time. Mentally, I was talking to someone earlier who I coach, and basically he was really caught up on the goal. He was like, oh, I want to make 50K. Like I want to make 100K. Like I want to do this. I want to do that. The money does not matter more so than the inputs and the things that you do each day to actually reach the goal, like whatsoever. So you can talk about the money, you can talk about the outcome that you want, but the outcome is separate from what you actually control. All you need to worry about is like the outcomes you need to focus on is, okay, did I do XYZ thing, XYZ input today? That's all. That's the outcome you need to look for each and every day. Did you do that? If you did that, be happy with your performance in that way. Now, did you do it and did you half-ass it is another thing. How much did you do it? How well did you do it? How well did you actually show up? Those are the things that you actually can improve. You improve the controllables, and that is it. And also, impatience is extremely deadly. If you're ever in a place where you're impatient to actually reach a result, you will never get the result. It will elude you. You're pretty much the entire time, because you're so you're so active against it, you do things that end up self-sabotaging you actually reaching the goal because you have impatience around accepting that inputs actually take time and it takes time to be good at something. So don't come in something for, less than a year and think you're going to do things that it took people 5 or 10 years to do. That's great if you are able to do that, but don't have that expectation for yourself. Have the expectation that time takes time at the end of the day. And you have to take time to actually be good at things. So give yourself a rest, give yourself a break, and that is all I have to say. Do not be impatient. I will see you guys in the next video, and I hope that this was helpful.